Igama lami Nqobile Khumalo, abangaziyo bangibizwa ngomtungo. Inkaba yami yona iphuma eSoshanguve, Block G, kodwa inkaba yakithi iphuma eNatal, Newcastle. My great-grandmother was a farmer in Valmansdal before the apartheid police relocated my family into what is now, our family residence in Soshanguve. So your question is very interesting, and I preface that with that introduction because it is that upbringing that's always put me at odds with what I've seen. Subsequent to that sort of upbringing, I've gone on to first, study at, some of the most prestigious schools in the world. First at WITS and a little bit of time at MIT. And then also, subsequent to that, professionally, become a financial analyst who was then later on, promoted to running one of the fastest growing funds in the country, and collectively between 3 individuals managing 52 billion rands in assets. It is that dual reality that I was faced with, which put me at odds with what I'd always felt we needed to achieve, to secure the socio-economic vision, which Nelisa so eloquently sort of alluded to in her intro, right? It's been that sort of upbringing that has made me keenly aware and made me very thankful for the opportunities which, I was, privy to, which a lot of people are not privy to, which really instilled this idea that, listen, if we're going to do things, we need to think about things in a contextually relevant manner. And it is this kind of thinking, which I think Lisa also referred to, the blessing in disguise, and how this current economic environment has, affected our careers and how we think about things. In some ways, COVID has been a blessing in disguise, because whilst it's very easy to lament on the very obvious and immediate impacts of a COVID, right? And you can think about what that does to a business owner, to businesses, to economies. I think we around the table, don't have a shortage of examples. What COVID has done is it's made the conversation that Nelisa started this talk with a lot easier to have. I think prior to COVID, I was walking around telling people, look, as financial institutions, we need to stop thinking about purely the financial return, and we need to start about the social compact that we have with the citizens. Mind you, the citizens whose money we're investing. And we can talk about the dynamics and the complexities that introduces a little bit later. But it is that conversation which was quite hard prior to COVID, which has now become part and parcel of how companies are thinking about what it is that we need to be doing. One of my favorite, economists in the world has a saying. It says it's not about whether this is about socialism or non-socialism. It's about whether this is going to be socialistic or nationalism or socialistic capitalism, right? Are we going to be protectorates, or are we going to be bastions? And we're seeing that play out, right? We also, whether you're referring to the US elections, or whether you're referring to a situation that was playing out here in our backyards in the Free State in Senegal, right? It is that reality that must implore us to start thinking about our responsibilities, particularly in the finance space, which is, I think, a laggard compared to other industries in terms of how it thinks about investing and our responsibility to the underlying investor, not purely from a shareholder point of view, but a stakeholder point of view as well. So the long and the short of it, that's what it is that I do. I spend my time thinking about that reality. I create financial instruments for businesses to use to appeal to investors. Our focus is not purely financial, although we do have a heavy, strong focus on finances. We focus quite aggressively as well on highlighting the benefits in investing in a particular business relative to its competitor that might not be doing a number of things, whether it's particular focus on employing women in a particular region of the country where women are, discriminated upon, or whether it's focused on youth. It's via these different vertices and matrices that we use to assess these businesses, and that's what I spend my time doing. We know what the issues are. We know that we need to resolve inequality, right? We need to make sure that those on the periphery of the economy are brought into the economy. We know we've got impending climate issues. We don't have a shortage of issues. What's clear about what, at the very least to me, what the core of the new economy needs to become is that, at the very least, for it to have any sort of credence, it needs to alleviate some of the issues that brought us here in the first place, right? And that means we need to address those things. So any new economy that is not, striving to, at the very least, play a role in fixing that skew is, in some sort of deep irony, cannibalizing itself, because you don't need to be a history buff or a Charles Dickens novel fundi to know how this ends. Quickly, one of the words that I'm becoming tired of is sustainability, because again, it's the new hot word. Just like innovation and structural racism were just a few months ago. But what we should be talking about when we say sustainability is sustainability in its entire context. If you're making returns, if you're invested in a company which pollutes the ravine down the road from you, and it's giving you 18% return, yet it's polluting your drinking water, how sustainable is that return? And how do we then say that the real return is that 18% minus inflation and that's the real return, when in actual fact, the 12% that's remaining is going to be used to find water that's drinkable, right? Take that example and apply it to many of the different instances that Thando is talking about, right? Now, I don't want to mention names, but I have to. Okay, well, actually, let me not. One of the big hospital builders in the world, which is a JSE listed company, which I'll remain unnamed, builds hospitals in Poland. So it takes money from the pension funds that Thando has described, builds hospitals in Poland, repatriates that money back, and then says to the underlying investor, here's your 12% return. Give us a pat on the shoulder because we've done a good job. When we have a shortage of hospitals here, so yes, they've achieved their goals. They might have reached alpha and beat the index, but that's sort of counterproductive, because if you consider how much you're paying for medical aid, how much, again, is that return a real return that is disposable? And you can take that same logic and apply it to security. In this country, we have one of the highest crime rates in the world. So you're going to take that 12% return and you're going to spend it on high medical aid, because you don't want to go to a public hospital. You're going to spend it on building big fences and the security company that's going to make sure that you're not attacked at night. And you're going to spend it on expensive schooling, because again, you don't want to take your kids to public schools. So how counterproductive is that thinking, that we think we can sort of outsource this idea of developing our own economies and spaces that we live and work? It's a complete deep irony and laughable at best. So we kind of need to start thinking about that ways. And I mean, again, just to drive the point home, I think of the top 40 listed companies, I think just under 25% is derived from revenues locally. So they don't even spend that money that we invest in these companies locally. They don't even use it to develop these local spaces. Yet the underlying investor is someone who lives and works here. So we need to start to begin having a conversation about what it is that we're trying to achieve here. Are we trying to make a return and not think about anything else? Or are we trying to create sustainable futures in which our well-being is something which is due consideration from these companies. And I think that's exactly where Simon is taking this question, and is exactly right. It is about well-being, because if you think about it, for the longest time since humans has become aware of their existence on this rock, it's been our survival that has been of utmost importance, right? Whether you're talking individually or as a species. And COVID made us realize that, right? Because the company which was the leading industrial company, or in leading industrial country, and that's a Freudian slip there, the leading industrial company that was pushing out, I think, an aircraft carrier every month at the height of World War II, was not even able to supply beds to its residents of New York at the height of COVID-19. And they also woke up to the reality that they don't even make their own, antibacterial medicine. They don't even make antibiotics in the US. And so here they've been fighting China and saying, oh, you do A, B, and C, but China says, well, we make all your antibiotics. Now, how counterproductive is that? And there's so many of those instances that exist in South Africa. And much of this conversation about needing to reimagine South Africa is primarily our need to stop outsourcing our own developmental agendas, under some new name of whatever it is that we're doing. It's quite simple. There's areas that have quite underdeveloped and have room for development and need development, that we haven't been concentrating on, because again, we are using systems, and I like to refer to them as mercantile systems. And please, this is not to say they're all bad, but they're not suited for the context in which we live in. And we need to have a very assertive conversation about what it is that we're trying to achieve. And so I think Thando is absolutely right. So I think, and let me, if you will allow me, Luvuyo, to lead on to one of the other questions someone has asked. I think it's a Robin who's asked this question. What does the panel think is the best way for foreigners to invest in South Africa? Now, I picked this question because I also find this interesting, because there's always this discussion about, we're going to scare off foreigners, we're going to do this and that if we do A, B, and C. Look, this idea that we are somehow, separate from the other is also one of the biggest fallacies ever, right? And I'll give you a specific example. 1 year ago, the president of Brazil, Bolsonaro, had sort of told the farmers next to the Amazon they can cut down the trees if they want. Now, if you know anything about international law and national sovereignty, Bolsonaro answered the question exactly like a law student would answer that question, which is, listen, I'm a sovereign nation. I can do whatever I want with those trees, and none of you can tell me otherwise. Now, if we're using the same thinking that we've been applying to all these problems for all these years, talking about national sovereignty and talking about being divided in our goals, Bolsonaro is correct. And to go and stop Bolsonaro from burning down the Amazon would be an international crime. Now, I think we would struggle to find someone in this chat, and please don't prove me wrong, someone who would agree with that argument, that we don't have a say. Clearly we have a say, because the Amazon produces nearly 60% of the world's oxygen. So this idea that, we need to think of foreigners as this external entity that's looking to do nefarious things locally. No, I think there's more than enough evidence that shows that we are more so than ever a global community. So the fact that I'm struggling with electricity is someone's problem in Sweden, because if you're going to supply me with cheap electricity, then I'm going to burn coal